Hi, I'm Fred with my Room at the Table Chapter 10 reply. I understand why my classmates fell in love with the romantic idea of equity, and the chapter leans into this collective desire we all have for fairness, inclusivity, and justice, especially when it comes to healthcare. It's a topic that tugs at our hearts because we know deep down that equity is something worth fighting for. But as much as I want to root for the vision presented in the chapter, I believe it misses the mark in several ways. First, there's this idea of dismantling systems. Chapter 10 boldly calls to tear down entrenched structures of privilege. It's compelling, but it lacks details on how to actually implement such drastic change. The chapter emphasizes that only by dismantling the current system can true equity be achieved. But what does that look like? It's one thing to say we need to start from scratch, but the reality is that we can't just erase flawed systems overnight without considering the ripple effect to the system that serves millions of people. The chapter doesn't provide a clear roadmap or actionable steps for this transformation, which was a little frustrating. And back in chapter 5, I remember that vision without action is a daydream. And here I felt that the vision lacked the concrete strategies to turn it into reality. Another part of the chapter that felt disconnected is the way it frames the current state of progress, or rather, it really doesn't acknowledge that any progress has been made. The statements like systems of power are inherently designed to exclude paints an ugly picture and ignores the meaningful steps that healthcare has taken in recent years. I've seen firsthand in hospitals and health systems they're working to address health disparities and improve access to care for marginalized communities. Of course, the work is far from done, but I feel it feels like chapter 10 is stuck in a narrative from decades ago when the needle hadn't moved at all back then. It's missed an opportunity to discuss how we can build on these gains rather than it dismisses them outright. I also found the chapter's all or nothing approach to change troubling. The idea that true equity can only be achieved by dismantling the entire system sounds alright in theory, but let's be honest. Real change happens in phases. We know that transformation, especially in something complex like healthcare, it's a process. The idea that we need to tear everything down to achieve equity overlooks the fact that reform often involves making compromises and the financial realities. And there's the question of who this change would impact and how. The chapter seems to focus on ideals without acknowledging the practical challenges of reforming a healthcare system that millions rely on. If we were to tear it down, as the chapter suggests, what happens to the people currently benefiting from these imperfect systems? It's not enough to just dream big. We have to consider how to bring everyone along. This made me feel like the chapter was missing a huge part of the conversation. What also struck me is how this chapter overlooks the importance of partnership. It's easy to say tear down the system, but in reality, you need the buy in of the very people and institutions currently in power if you want any kind of meaningful reform. Chapter 10 doesn't really address how to engage these stakeholders or how to make them allies in the fight for equity. We need to think about how to involve everyone, from policymakers to healthcare executives, if we're going to make equity more than just a buzzword. I was a bit put off by the chapter's tone, which felt overly critical of the current system without offering a real path forward. Yes, there are significant issues with how healthcare is structured, and equity is still a challenge. But by focusing so heavily on what's wrong, the chapter misses the chance to provide an actionable roadmap. There was potential to discuss how to improve things in ways that are feasible through policy reforms, innovative pilot programs, or collaboration between public and private sectors. But the chapter stays stuck in a mindset of tearing down rather than building up. So, while Chapter 10 of Room at the Table brings up some important points about equity, it romanticizes the concept without grounding it in realities of making change. It misses on balancing idealism with pragmatism and doesn't follow the idea that progress is gradual and requires collaboration. We need to keep dreaming of a more equitable future, but we also have to be prepared to work within the systems we have and find realistic ways to reform them. Equity shouldn't be about tearing down what exists, but about thoughtfully creating something better. Thanks.